Well, hello everybody, it's Foxy speaking. Oh dear. I don't know if I should say this or not, but this is a video, of course, as many of you know, in memory of my very late grandfather, Edmund. I mean, in reminiscing and remembering Edmund, my very late grandfather, who actually very sadly passed away a year ago today, a year ago exactly. 18th of February 2020 was when he went, and it's 18th February 2021. Yes. But yes, I wanted to share you actually my very first memory of Edmund. Oh gosh, you're going back to my early childhood. When he just died, a flashback came back to me from when I was a very, very young toddler in a pram, being pushed in the pram with my younger brother, Rexy. Both toddlers, because we're 15 months apart in age. And I think we were going to this zoo until when I was looking ahead until I saw this man, this elderly looking man with glasses on and a reasonable full head of hair. Well, he didn't have, not entirely full head of hair because his scalp was very see-through on the top of his hair. I remembered seeing an elderly man with an older lady, not quite elderly looking, but fairly old looking. That was Anne, my grandmother. I remembered seeing an elderly man with glasses smiling and gazing upon me, and I was just looking at him, and he was just smiling and gazing upon me. That's one of my very first memories of Edmund, and one of my next memories of Edmund was going over to my grandmother's, was when my father took myself and my brother over to my grandmother's years and years before they moved to the Isle of Wight, or Port Slade in the Brighton and Hove region, and I remembered seeing her, and then I very much remembered seeing the very same man who looked exactly the same as when I saw him as a young toddler, and that was Edmund, my late grandfather. I do have many memories, and I've always remembered him always looking like that. Yes, but I could certainly reminisce many memories of Edmund from my childhood to this day. And even as I got older in my childhood, always seeing Edmund, I always recognised him, even as he aged over the years. I recognised him very, very vividly. And spending time with Edmund, and certainly my grandmother Anne in my childhood, were very happy days indeed. And I remember many occasions when I was about 7 or so, they just moved down to the Brighton and Hove region, Port Slade in the Brighton and Hove region, and whenever giving them a visit or staying over with them, and whenever Edmund was resting in the bedroom, in both his and my grandmother's bedroom, I remember sneaking in to the bedroom, asking him numerous questions. I thought it would be fun to do that. I think I went too far, asking Edmund so many questions whenever he was resting in bed, and no one was around but me, and I just asked him numerous questions until either my grandmother Anne had to hastily insist I'd stop, or if Edmund had to ask me in a firm but friendly way, but not in a shouty way, to kindly stop. I mean, I've got many, many fond memories of my late grandfather Edmund, and he certainly shared with me some wonderful, wonderful stories. And he did actually show me once a wonderful picture of him and his late older brother Paul from his childhood, years before he died. And after he died, I saw this wonderful picture of him and his older brother, which I could cherish for a lifelong lifetime. And he was a wonderful man, Edmund. And we used to sporadically do some bus trips together when spending time with him. And sometimes, and when he moved to the Isle of Wight, because he and my grandmother Anne moved to the Isle of Wight quite a few years ago. It was years before Edmund sadly passed away, you know, but they moved to the Isle of Wight, and we did the Isle of Wight steam railway whenever I stayed over with them on the Isle of Wight, and certainly did a few bus trips and visited many wonderful places. And he had a wonderful last years on the Isle of Wight, Edmund did, in the very latter of his life, you know. And even into my youth, I still very much enjoyed spending time with my late grandfather Edmund, and the same could certainly be said with Anne, my grandmother. She's still very much alive as of 2021 and being vaccinated against COVID-19 several weeks short ago. Yes. But over many years there were some concerns over Edmund, but then about a year or so later, because I remembered about 3 years short of Edmund's shocking diagnosis, my grandmother stated Edmund as looking a little bit underweight, because of course he was very slim, unfortunately. And but then it was about a year and a half, about 18 months, 20 months later, about 21 months later or so, Edmund was looking thinner than when Grandma stated he was looking underweight. That's Anne who stated he was looking underweight, and about 20 months later he was looking thinner than he did, say, 20 months before then, which was actually a big surprise. And yes, but it was about 20 months or 21 months later that I particularly noticed he was getting thinner. Yes. But it did worry Anne quite a bit. But over a course of time he was getting thinner until he had to have a blood sample taken, which gave him his diagnosis of thrombocythemia, which is a type of blood cancer, but it's not a contagious disease. But it's something you can be medicated for to stop it from getting worse. But it was quite surprising. Back in July, it was just over a year and a half before Edmund died. I remembered hearing from my grandmother Anne, it was just after the heat wave of 2018, before the next minor heat wave of the summer of 2018, before it subsided totally. I remembered Anne saying, "You know when you need a certain number of red blood cells, sadly Edmund has double the number of red blood cells he needs and too many platelets, and he has to take medication for it to stop it from getting worse." And it was a big surprise after she told me the whole thing. And I remembered seeing him some weeks after Edmund's diagnosis. And when I saw him, because compared to the year before, in 2017, he was looking rather thin and quite underweight actually, and also aged compared to several months ago. Compared to, say, about 4 months ago or so, he'd really aged. And then the very next year, and with another weight looking thinner than he did the year before, I said hello to Edmund, but then when I looked at him after he walked into the living room, because it was myself and Anne who'd met first before I met Edmund, because he'd actually gone out actually at that point, but then he just came back shortly after I came back from a long journey to stay over with them. I looked at Edmund and I was just like, my jaw dropped and was impaired momentarily from moving up again, and until I could move it again I was like, oh my goodness, Edmund. I should not have said this, but this is what I said. I was like, oh my goodness, Edmund, are you okay? Is it me, or have you lost weight and suddenly aged? He was like, oh, before he could say anything, my grandma was like, don't ask questions like that. Oh dear. No, but I was very surprised when I saw what Edmund looked like. When I saw him once again, I'd never seen him look very, very skinny like that before, and neither did Anne, actually, my grandmother. But unfortunately, over a period of months, he was losing more and more weight, which was sad. And by the very next year, he'd lost weight again by almost a stone, because in August of 2018, Edmund, he only weighed 8 stone 2 back in August of 2018, which is very, very skinny for a man. I mean, he's quite little in height and only weighed 8 stone 2 in August 2018, which for a man is nothing. Oh. And then the very next year, in 2019, after 2018, the very same month in August, he was 7 stone 8. And then several months later, he was about 7 stone 3, 7 stone 4, 7 stone 5, just before the end of 2019. And that was just shocking, I do say. And it was a very big surprise to Anne, actually, because Anne, my grandmother, described him as looking emaciated. So, yes, it was a big shock to Anne, who had never seen, she said, but actually before he died he was under 7 stone, which really is a big shock for a man if you're that weight. And my grandmother described him as looking emaciated before he died. But over the course of months to over a year after Edmund's thrombocythemia diagnosis, it became more difficult for him over the years, but and with health-wise and doing other stuff and performing tasks and day-to-day routine stuff, but Edmund stayed at home with my grandmother Anne until the very end. But painfully, eventually, Edmund sadly passed away in the very early hours on the 18th of February 2020 with my grandmother Anne by his side. I could not believe it. He'd gone. It was just... It was just so difficult to say goodbye or I love you anymore once Edmund went. Oh dear. I mean, when I lost Edmund, I was absolutely shattered. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I mean, Edmund it was absolutely heartbreaking when Edmund died. I mean, he was only 73 when he died, very sadly, which is really much too early. It's really not that old at all to go at 73. Which is actually the age my grandmother is now, 73 years old. I mean, Edmund, when he went, he would have been 74 in October of 2020, but he was 73 when he sadly died. And, I mean, I was absolutely shattered when he died, and so was Anne. She was very, very upset when he sadly died also. And oh dear, the funeral was sad. I mean, I gave a speech, I nearly couldn't get through it, because I was in tears, almost. And it took me about another 3 weeks to actually speak out openly about the loss of Edmund to many friends and family of mine. And, yes, it took that long. I mean, I was still very upset deep down about 3 weeks later after talking about the loss of Edmund, but I wasn't in a sobbing fit or anything. But I've got many wonderful memories of Edmund. I mean, he was just a wonderful grandfather. He was just lovely. Really, he was a very loyal man. He meant a lot. He really meant a lot to me. And so he really meant so much to my brother, my father, and my aunts and uncles on my father's side of the family. And he really meant a lot to all my grandmother's friends, Edmund did. He was just a great man, and a man worth reminiscing. And not only was he very, very full of loyalty, he had a relaxing temperament and was really, he had a calmer nature compared to a lot of men. Sorry to be discriminative, but he was very temperamental also, Edmund was, and quite a patient man, quite little in height, and fairly skinny, having survived a heart attack and having a quadruple bypass fitted, and because he smoked, unfortunately, for about 30 years of his life until he was forced to give up following the heart attack. And he was just wonderful. Edmund was wonderful. He meant a lot to me as a child. Yes. And he was too wonderful. Yes. I mean, it was such a shame when he died. I mean, but I remember talking to many new friends of mine outside of the rail enthusiast community on the YouTube. I remember talking to her very openly about the loss of Edmund, and she shared with me this endearing phrase I will cherish heartily for a lifelong lifetime. Here it is. People can die, but we do hold our memories forever in our hearts and minds. I'm just so thankful for learning it, and I'm very fortunate to have learned this, and I just wished I'd learned it a long time ago, because the sorrowful bereavement over Edmund's death affected me deeply, and the same could be said for Anne and my family once he died. I mean, sorrowful bereavement is emotionally painful, but having learned this, I couldn't thank my friend enough for sharing this to me. I really couldn't thank her enough for it. If I hadn't learned this saying, I probably wouldn't be talking to you about it. And I will show a few pictures of Edmund before this video ends. Thank you so much indeed for watching, and I will certainly see you in the very next video. And another time, and goodbye, everybody. And I'm sorry, it's a bit of a sad day because it marks 1 year exactly since Edmund passed away. Thank you indeed for watching from Foxy. Bye bye.